We've been talking about the question of joy and anxiety, and I think if we had the capacity, the power, the resources, or a magic wand, the way forward would be to end anxiety as experienced by our young people. But I just want to hold on to the reality that for some cases, for some instances, or for some moments, we're just not going to be able to abate, buffer, or reduce the anxiety. And yet we think that as people of faith, God wants there to be a measure of joy experienced even in the very midst of that unabated suffering and that unabated anxiety. How would you try to care for a young person in your congregation or your youth group to create space and awareness of that capacity for joy in the midst of anxiety?
Yeah, let me first just say, kind of put something off to the side and say, there are situations where anxiety is a helpful tool, and it leads us to things that should be changed. And those might be the result of human sin, or they might be non-preventable suffering that happens. But sometimes anxiety is a marker that leads us to change our course or change our action. But to more directly answer your question, I think the key is experiencing your story as truthfully witnessed by another who can withstand that story. And that starts off a pastoral relationship that's helpful in the midst of anxiety. And the key, I say the key ingredient in a pastoral relationship is delight. So if you can delight in the life of a teen who's experiencing some of these symptoms, you have an opportunity, I think, to help that teen feel something more of God's presence, of accompaniment, of maybe the not yet, which is breaking into the now, even as you do your ministry and pray for God's kingdom to come in the midst of that. But I think starting out with an authentic relationship and a story truly told in a way that you can kind of withstand that story with an attitude of delight is really, I think, the key aspect for me of being with the kind of suffering that doesn't always go away.
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that joy does not require or even expect the absence of suffering, or in this case, anxiety. I think, for me, it's important to somehow encourage the seeking of meaning within experiences of suffering or anxiety, so that the experience itself may not be good, quote unquote, or may not be desirable, although I agree with you, there are constructive forms of anxiety that actually help us to do good things. But the suffering itself is never good inherently, perhaps. But if one can find meaning in that suffering, one, in my experience, can experience good that comes from it, right? And so the suffering or the anxiety in this case may not be the good, quote unquote, but something good can come from it. And that seems to me to be in line inherently with the Christian faith tradition, that it's not that we would want people to suffer, but that life-giving experiences can and do come out of suffering, even especially ones that we may least expect. And so helping young people understand that feeling joy doesn't mean you're not going to struggle, but there can be joy in finding meaning in that struggle and finding opportunities to use that struggle for something that's part of your own good and maybe the greater good.